Have you ever witnessed a moment when something that was supposed to be beautiful was destroyed right before your eyes? An 8-year-old boy's birthday party. Just a cake, a few balloons, and the small joy of a simple black family. Then, a group of police officers burst in, without warning, and destroyed it all. The cake was smashed to the ground. Presents were trampled, children screamed, adults trembled. And, in the midst of that chaos, a father stood still. A father who had to choose between keeping his cover up to protect the safety of the entire community and standing up to protect his own child. If it were you, what would you choose? Have you ever wondered if on your child's birthday you had to kneel down in front of dozens of people just to protect their lives? Would you be as calm as Elijah Carter? If people insulted you, insulted your skin color, insulted the child you love the most, would you stay silent or stand up? Today's story isn't just about a ruined birthday. It's about a community torn apart, a father tested to the core, and a single phone call that ended the careers of seemingly untouchable men. Come with me through this story, a story that perhaps we all will see ourselves in somewhere. If you believe stories of truth and courage deserve to be heard, please like, share, and subscribe to support us. The afternoon light in Maple Crest Park is always very special. It is not as bright as the summer, nor as cold as the winter. It is warm enough to make people want to slow down, want to sit on the green grass, want to feel the way the gentle wind blows through the old trees. That day, the wind also blew in that gentle way. Only no one expected that it would be the afternoon when the life of an entire community was torn apart. Elijah Carter stood by the aluminum folding table, where his wife, Marissa, was setting down a basketball-shaped cake. He looked at her hands, deft and precise, and thought briefly that these small, peaceful things were worth preserving. On the other side, Jordan, his 8-year-old son, laughed so hard his cheeks swelled up, running around the colorful balloons that were swaying in the wind. His favorite was the big orange balloon tied to the chair, trying to hug it like a friend. "Daddy, what time do we blow out the candles?" Jordan asked, sounding as excited as if he were about to play a real basketball game. Elijah chuckled, placing his hand on his son's head. "Let your friends arrive first. Whoever wants to play with you can wait for them." Jordan nodded, his expression adorably serious. The way he stood with his hands on his hips made Elijah laugh out loud. There were times in life when just looking at a child made your heart melt. Neighbors' folding chairs surround this picnic area. In Riverton, a small town in North Carolina, people still keep the old habit. When they see someone having a small party, they bring their own chairs and food to contribute. Lucille, 78, brought a tray of sweet cobbler. Jerome, the head of the Veterans Association, brought a gallon jug of lemonade. They weren't rich, but they knew how to share. A community culture Elijah always appreciated. He stood watching everyone talking and laughing, suddenly feeling a warmth spreading through his chest. It wasn't big, not intense, but enough to make him feel, well, life is sometimes very kind. But even while laughing, Elijah still had a habit of glancing around, observing every little movement. A strange car stopped, he would notice. A man walked by but looked too long, he also noticed. It was not the normal habit of a father attending his child's birthday party. It is the habit of a person who has lived for many years in a state of constant vigilance. "Aren't you tired, Elijah? Always watching, always on guard?" Marissa asked. He didn't reply. He just smiled and said something she didn't quite understand. "There are people like me. If you want peace, you have to pay attention to everything around you." At the end of the lawn, the wind carried the smell of BBQ smoke. Other kids ran back and forth, their mouths smeared with ice cream and their feet covered in dirt. Fathers clapped and cheered as they tossed paper balls into the trash can. A young man pulled out an old Bluetooth speaker and played soft soul music, not loud enough to echo in a corner of the park. The atmosphere was so peaceful that if framed, one might mistakenly believe that this entire town had never known injustice. Jordan ran to Elijah and hugged his legs. "Daddy, look at me." He held his first gift, a small, bright red model fire truck, up in front of his father. Elijah bent down and touched his son's forehead. "It's beautiful. Do you like it?" Jordan nodded vigorously. Elijah smiled, but his eyes lingered on the boy's face a little longer than usual. There was something in them, a nameless worry, a fear that had been simmering for a long time. He squinted at the distant sky and took a deep breath. There were a few seconds of unusual silence, as if he was holding something back in his heart. Jordan tilted his head. "Daddy, are you okay?" Elijah patted his son's head. "It's okay. Daddy was just thinking of what to play with you later." But no, it wasn't like that. There was a strange feeling in his heart, the kind of feeling that his instincts as a man who had spent many years on duty made it impossible for him to ignore. A blue pickup truck drove across the park. Slowly, very slowly, Elijah followed out of the corner of his eye. Not too obvious, not too tense. He let his hand lightly touch the watch face on his wrist, a small touch, but a mental reminder. Always be careful. The car drove on, turning out of the park. Everything was peaceful again. Marissa walked over to her husband and put her hand on his. "Are you worried again?" Elijah smiled. "No, it's just, sometimes, I hope this place will stay peaceful forever." Marissa looked at him a moment longer, then whispered, "I hope so." The party began to get more lively. Children played spoonball, and laughter echoed in the corner of the park. A few sparrows perched on the wooden fence. Occasionally, the wind blew, and the oak leaves rustled, reminding people that time was always moving. None of them knew that the next movement would be a thunderstorm. No one knew that in just a few minutes, all that was beautiful here would be crushed. Even Elijah, who was always cautious, could not have expected that today would be the day when the things he had been trying to avoid all his life would come all at once. "I only know one thing. Peace, if it is precious, is often more fragile than people think. And a child's childhood should not be a place for power to trample." The wind changed direction around 4 p.m. In the park, the adults were chatting and suddenly stopped talking, as if everyone felt something was approaching, but no one could name it. The children were still laughing. The cake was still intact, but Elijah was different. He was stacking more paper cups on the table when his shoulders tightened instinctively. There was no loud noise, no emergency call, just a feeling he had learned to trust years ago. Marissa walked over, intending to ask him something, but before she could open her mouth, a series of loud noises came from the park gate. A familiar sound, a sound that any black American in a poor neighborhood knows by heart. The sound of a police car approaching, the engine revving as if it was about to crash into someone. Mrs. Lucille quickly put down the tray of cakes. Mr. Jerome stood up, his hands clenching reflexively. As for the children, they gradually fell silent, their smiles disappearing like the wind being extinguished by someone. Jordan looked up at Elijah. "Daddy, what's wrong?" Elijah bent down, put his hand on his son's shoulder, and tried to keep his voice calm. "Stay close to me, okay? Just stay close." Jordan nodded, but his eyes were full of worry. 3 patrol cars stopped less than 20 feet from the picnic area. The doors opened, and the first to step out was Lieutenant Donna Huxley, a tall, broad-shouldered white woman whose eyes always seemed to be looking for something to crush. Following her were 2 officers, Miller and Chase. Both had the look Elijah had seen 1,000 times: the superior gaze, the commanding tone, the demeanor of someone accustomed to dominating. Huxley stepped forward, his boots clicking on the cement floor, as if he were trying to intimidate others. "What is this?" she said, scanning the scene of a crime. "A birthday? Oh, that's cute. But let me remind you, this park doesn't allow large gatherings after 3 p.m. Mr. Jerome immediately responded. "That's not true. We made an appointment. I'm the one who signed the permit." Huxley sneered. "Ah, you signed? Okay, I'll check. But look at it, these parties, they're all trouble spots." She took a few steps forward, then suddenly knocked over the basket of paper balls the children were playing with. The ball rolled to the ground, and Jordan stared blankly at it. A little girl standing nearby burst into tears. Chase laughed heartily. Marissa stepped up. "Officer, we're just having a kid's birthday party. No noise, no disturbance, everything is within limits." Huxley glanced over, his eyes cold. "Oh, I know. You guys always say the same thing. But every time you go there, there's trash, noise, and some sneaky drinkers. She tilted her head, pretending to pace around the table like a serious crime scene examiner. Elijah stood still, his hands clenching. He was almost on the verge of jumping up. But he held himself back because Jordan was watching him, because the community was watching him. He whispered to himself, "Don't. Not yet. Not yet." There was a rustling of wrapping paper. Huxley kicked Jordan's small gift box lightly as he spoke in a sarcastic tone. "Are these things licensed? Or stolen? Or from the welfare fund?" Mrs. Lucille leaned on her cane and stepped forward, trying to stay calm. "We paid for it ourselves. You have no right." Before she could finish her sentence, Huxley slapped the table so hard that the stack of paper plates fell to the floor. "Old lady, shut up. I say one thing, you listen one thing. Understand?" The air was stifling, a silence as heavy as stone. Jordan pulled Elijah's shirt and whispered shakily, "Daddy, why did they do that? They're the police." Elijah swallowed hard, then looked down at his son. "Stay behind, Daddy. Don't run around." The boy nodded, his lips pursed. There was a small noise, just the sound of a soda can falling. But it made Huxley start and spin around, as if searching for an excuse. She shouted, "Who dropped that? See, I told you, this kind of gathering is causing a disturbance." Then Huxley looked straight at Elijah. "Brother, stand up here." Elijah slowly stepped forward, keeping his hands at his sides, not in his pockets to avoid being perceived as defiant. "What's the matter, officer?" Huxley looked him up and down. Then the corners of his lips curled into a cold smile. "Ah, so you're the organizer? Good. Let me ask, where do you get the money to do all this?" "My boss said this area is prone to abuse of support." Elijah remained calm. "We save, we work, and we have the right to celebrate our children's birthdays." Huxley raised an eyebrow. "Rights? You say rights? There are laws here, and I am the one who enforces them. When I say stop, you stop." Elijah took a deep breath. Anger rose inside him, thick as smoke. But he kept it down, partly because Jordan was cowering behind him, partly because he knew someone like Huxley was just waiting for him to strike back. "Officer, none of us are in violation," Elijah said slowly, clearly. "If you want to see the permit, I will give it to you. If you want to measure the noise level, go ahead. No one will object." Huxley crossed his arms. "Well, you sure can talk. But you know what I don't like the most?" Elijah was silent. "It's the look in your eyes." Huxley moved closer. "That look of knowing more than you're saying. I hate people like that." Then she suddenly kicked the gift table. Children's small gift boxes flew to the ground, breaking into pieces. A toy car rolled out, the front of the car broken in half. Jordan shouted, "Don't touch my gift." The boy lunged, but Marissa caught him in time. "Jordan, no!" The boy burst into tears, holding his mother's hand trembling. Elijah closed his eyes for a second. Just a second. But it was a second that he would remember for the rest of his life. When he opened his eyes, he knew what was coming. Huxley looked at Jordan with interest, as if he had just found something that would make the strongest man fall to his knees. "Oh, is this your son?" She bent down and pretended to flick the broken toy car. "Poor thing. It must be the only thing he has." Elijah took a step forward. His voice was low, but not out of control. "Officer, I'm going to ask you to stop threatening children immediately." Huxley laughed loudly. "You are giving me orders? I am the one with the gun here. You know that?" She held up the walkie-talkie. "I'm calling for reinforcements. There are signs of a disturbance here." The whole surrounding community almost held its breath. Marissa whispered, "Elijah, stop. They can do anything." He turned to look at his wife, his eyes as calm as a lake before a storm. "I know, but they are not allowed to insult my son." In Elijah's head, two thoughts swirled. If I stay silent, they will trample the party, trample the dignity of this community. If I react, they will use it against me, and Jordan will see me in handcuffs. He had faced many dangerous situations, but none as difficult as having to choose between staying silent and protecting his child's dignity. While he was struggling internally, Huxley took a step forward. Her voice was as sharp as a knife. "Listen up. I want everyone to disperse. Now. Immediately. Elijah clenched his fists. And just then, another police siren sounded in the distance. Not one, three. A chill ran down everyone's spine. Marissa held Elijah's hand tighter. And Elijah, he stood still, as if he had seen something greater than the threat before him. A thought flashed through his mind, quick as a flash of lightning. If things go too far, I can make that phone call. The phone call he never wanted to make. The phone call that could change everything. But when he looked at Jordan, his eyes red, clinging to his mother, Elijah knew. There are times when silence is no longer an option. The new patrol cars made the air in the park thick, like someone had just closed off the sky. Elijah felt his heart beat slow, a beat not from fear, but from knowing how bad this could get. The black community in Riverton knows this scene well. Not once, not twice, but too many times to believe it was just a routine check. Jordan stood behind Elijah, eyes wide, but no longer daring to cry. The 8-year-old, who had been laughing and chasing an astronaut-shaped balloon a moment ago, was now eerily silent. Marissa held her son's hand tightly, her other hand gripping Elijah's shirt as if to keep him close to them. Elijah placed his hand on his wife's, so lightly it was almost fleeting, but enough for Marissa to know he was there, holding on. Even though the wind is blowing away all the peace they have just tried to build. 3 patrol cars stopped about 15 feet from the cake table. The doors swung open, and 4 officers got out 3 men. 1 woman, all dressed as if they were about to bust a gang of criminals. Not a kid's birthday party with red and blue balloons and a happy birthday Jordan banner. A tall officer, his name tag reading Hollister, asked loudly, "What's going on here? We've received reports of disturbances and threats to law enforcement." Huxley stood up straight, his voice full of self-proclaimed authority. "I request that this group be disbanded. They are uncooperative and hostile." Elijah heard every word, but what sent a chill down his spine was the way she deliberately described them, as if the community were a hotbed of violent crime, not peaceful people celebrating a child's birthday. Mr. Jerome took a step forward. Though old and stooped, he retained the resilient air of a man who had lived through the civil rights era. "Officers," he enunciated, "no one here is causing trouble. The party is registered with the city. You can check the records." Hollister looked at him as if he were a complete fool. "You better back off. We don't want to bother the elderly." The words felt like a slap. Elijah saw Jerome's shoulders shake, not with fear, but with anger. Lucille walked over and took his hand, as if afraid he would get emotional and fall ill. Huxley crossed his arms, looking at Elijah with a lopsided smile. "Brother, come up here. Answer." Elijah stepped forward. He kept his chin straight, his back straight, the calm demeanor of someone who didn't want to cause conflict, but also didn't sacrifice his dignity. Huxley pointed at him, then looked at the newly arrived officers. "Here, the leader of the riot group. I told him to disperse, but he resisted. He probably has a criminal record. You can tell what kind of person he is." Elijah pursed his lips. Just one sentence, he thought. Just one more, and she'd be over his last nerve. Marissa tugged at his sleeve. "Elijah, please, hold on." For Jordan, Elijah took a deep breath. He had weathered rough times in his life, but none as rough as the way his son looked at him now. Requires both strength and calmness. Huxley stepped closer to him, close enough that Elijah could smell the strong coffee and stale tobacco on her breath. "Who do you think you are?" Huxley said quietly, but venomously. "Do as I tell you. No questions asked. No arguments." Elijah kept his voice low, but each word seemed to be compressed from deep within his chest. "I'm a father. That's all I want to do today." Huxley laughed out loud. "A father? You don't look like it. You look like the type who picks fights with the police every chance he gets." One of the officers behind him, Miller, interjected. "The way he stands looks aggressive. I suggest you search him. He might be hiding something." People around began to worry. Elijah felt a slight tremor in his palms. Not from fear of being caught, but from the pain of seeing his community treated like criminals simply because they existed. He tilted his head and lowered his voice to Marissa. "Please put Jordan behind Mrs. Lucille." Marissa swallowed and did as she was told. Jordan looked back at him, his eyes wide and wet, as if he wanted to cry and ask, "Daddy, why do they hate us so much?" Huxley signaled, "Check people. Look for ID. Look for anything suspicious." Elijah didn't move. He knew that a strong reaction would give them an excuse. And he knew they were waiting for exactly that. Miller stepped forward, reaching into Elijah's pockets. Elijah said slowly, "I don't object, but I won't let you touch me without a good reason." Miller growled, "We don't need a reason when there's a sign of threat. You're resisting." Elijah closed his eyes for a second. Hundreds of memories flooded his mind. The times he was stopped for driving at night. The times white people called him boy. The times he had to swallow his anger to survive until the next day. But today was different. Today, Jordan saw it all, and his heart would not allow him to bow his head. "State your name," Hollister said. "Elijah Carter," he replied. "Job?" Elijah considered for a moment. He didn't want to lie, but he couldn't tell the truth either. He simply replied, "I work in an office. Administrative shift." "Where?" "I am not required to provide that detail." Huxley laughed contemptuously. "There. See? That's how idle people always answer." There was another silence. Not one of fear, but one of having had enough. "Mister," Jerome said in a trembling voice, "you cannot insult us like that. This is a child's birthday party." Chase stepped forward and shouted at him, "Back off. Do you want to be handcuffed for obstruction?" Jordan burst into tears for the second time. Things happened faster than anyone realized. Huxley suddenly jerked Elijah's hand. "Kneel down. Check for security." Elijah reflexively took a half step back, pulling his hand away from the insolence. That moment, just a moment, was enough for Huxley to shout, "Resist! Prepare to control." Miller and Chase rushed towards him. Marissa screamed. Lucille hugged Jordan. The crowd gathered in a circle of shock. Elijah raised his hands, not to fight back, but to prevent something worse. "Stop! I don't resist." But they had waited too long for this moment. Huxley growled, "We'll start with proper procedure. Carter, kneel." Elijah looked into Jordan's eyes. The boy was shaking, tears streaming down his face. He called softly, "Daddy." Elijah felt his heart breaking, but he also knew some battles could not be won with fists. He slowly knelt down, his knees touching the ground, dust and grass tickling his shins. Miller sneered, "Good. Finally listening." Huxley stood before him, her shadow blocking out the sunlight. "This is where you belong," she whispered. On the ground, Elijah looked up at her. His eyes were not angry, not scared, not subdued, but it was the look of someone who had lost all patience with cruelty. And in that look, there was a warning. Huxley saw it, but she misunderstood. She thought it was a protest. But Elijah knew better. That was the moment he realized he couldn't let this go any further. For Jordan, for Marissa, for the community that was shaking behind him. His hand slowly lowered to his pocket, where the phone lay. A decision formed clearly in his mind. If they took another step, he would call. He would end this nightmare, no matter the cost. Suddenly, Hollister shouted, "Threat signal. Fall back." Miller and Chase immediately withdrew their hands and took a defensive stance. Elijah let out a heavy breath. His hand tightened around the phone in his pocket. He hadn't pulled it out yet, but he knew the moment of reckoning was drawing ever closer. One wrong move on their part, one more provocative smile from Huxley, the call would be made. And when it is called, nothing is ever the same again. None of them, especially Huxley, knew that they were just a push of a button away from collapse. One button can turn the storm around. No one knows, except Elijah. The wind in the park began to blow back, carrying the smell of hay and a faint sound like the echo of a storm yet to form. No one spoke. Even the children were silent, as if fear had learned to enter their hearts without knocking. Elijah knelt on the grass, his hand still pressed against his pocket, where the phone lay cold and still. That little phone, at that moment, was like the border between storm and hope. If he pulled it out, everything would change. Not just for him, not just for Jordan, but for the Maple Crest neighborhood and perhaps beyond. Lieutenant Huxley walked slowly toward him, her boots crushing the grass underfoot. She looked down at Elijah, as if looking at a pathetic man begging for mercy. "There, you finally know your place," Huxley said, his voice flat and cold. "Not everyone has the privilege of standing on equal footing with the police. Especially people like you." The word "you guys" fell to the ground like a rock. Everyone present understood what it meant. Elijah raised his head, slowly, calmly. He said nothing. But the look in his eyes was enough to make Miller take half a step back. Huxley grinned. "What are you looking at, I ask you?" Elijah replied, his voice low but clear. "I'll see. How much longer until you go too far?" The air froze. Chase glanced at Huxley, as if waiting for orders. Marissa trembled, holding Jordan close to her chest. "Don't touch my husband, please." But none of the officers looked at her. In their eyes, the pleas of a black woman were just noise. Elijah closed his eyes. He grew up with a father who always told him three things: pick your fights, pick your timing, and when you choose, don't back down. He wondered, was this the right time? Or was it just a trap to make him lose everything? In his head, two voices collided like waves crashing against a rock. If I call, there will be dire consequences. If I don't call, they will trample on everyone. And Jordan will remember this moment for the rest of his life. A father doesn't just protect his children with his hands, but with choices. "We're doing a full search," Hollister announced. "Miller, Chase, hold him down. I want to see his ID, his pockets, see what he's hiding." Elijah knew this well. When they decided to do a thorough search, it meant they would search every inch of clothing, every corner of the banquet table, and might accidentally find what they were looking for, even though it didn't exist. The children huddled against the adults. Mr. Jerome clenched his fists, his eyes bloodshot. "No," he shouted. "No one touches Elijah. I've been here 40 years. I know this game." Hollister turned to him. "If you say one more word, I will arrest you for obstruction." Lucille stepped forward, leaning on her cane. "Please. The child is scared. It's just a birthday. Just—" "Silence!" Huxley shouted. "The old woman has no right to speak." Jordan burst into tears. This time, not from fear, but from pain. It hurts to see the adults you love being humiliated. Elijah opened his eyes. He knew he couldn't let this go on. He'd endured for years. But at this point, silence wasn't safety, it was surrender. He raised his hand, very slowly, not in a hurry. Then he said, his voice low but as heavy as an oath, "Huxley, if you take another step, I'll call." The whole patrol stopped. Hollister laughed loudly. "Call? Call who? These people around here are always threatening. Call the pastor? Call the PTA? Or call those civil defense groups you like to yell at?" Huxley looked at Elijah, arms crossed. "Okay, call. I want to see who defends you." Miller whispered to Chase. "Does he have someone important on his number?" Chase shrugged. "At most, I'll call a lawyer for free." Huxley leaned down, close to Elijah's face. "Call Carter. Call." Elijah looked her straight in the eyes. No shaking, no fear, no avoidance. There is only decision. He pulled out his phone. It was a small action, but in the circumstances, it was like a bolt of lightning. The whole community behind held its breath. Huxley laughed, folding his arms. "Good. I'll see what you come up with." Elijah opened his contacts. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but because he knew this call was irrevocable. There are actions that are like walking through a door. Once you step through, there is no turning back. He clicked on a familiar name. Display. Marshall. Emergency line. Hollister narrowed his eyes. "Marshall? Which Marshall?" Elijah held the phone to his ear. His breathing evened. 1 beat, 2 beats, 3 beats. Then the other end picked up. A deep, clear, powerful voice. "Carter? Confirm security code." Elijah replied immediately. "Thompson 9, Echo 4, Unit Blue." The whole police team stood rooted to the spot. Huxley frowned, not understanding what was going on. What? What did you just say?" Elijah continued, his voice calm. "I'm at Maple Crest Park, Riverton. I need immediate assistance. Situation: abuse of power, civil intimidation, Conduct beyond standards. The person on the other end didn't ask any further questions. Confirm alarm. Response unit is activating. Stand still. Elijah closed the phone. For a moment, the space was so quiet that you could hear the wind running through the trees. Then, the reaction began. Hollister shouted, "Carter, what the hell did you just call?" Huxley stepped forward and tugged at Elijah's collar. "Who did you just call? Tell me." Elijah looked up. His gaze was calm to the point of making others uncomfortable. "I warned you. You should have stopped." A radio buzzed from Miller's patrol car. The voice from the operator. "All units at Maple Crest Park. Request cordon off. Special surveillance team approaching." Hollister turned pale. "Special surveillance team? Which team?" Miller looked at the notice, his voice trembling. "Not the city team, but the federal code." Huxley took a step back, eyes wide. "No. No way." Elijah stood up slowly. Not aggressively, not violently. Still calm, like someone who knew he was on the right side of the truth. "I was patient," he said. "I tried to make today just my son's birthday." He looked at Jordan. The baby was sobbing in his mother's arms. "But you picked the wrong family to threaten." The sound of helicopters appeared in the distance. Loud, deep, and gradually growing louder. Several officers cursed nervously. Huxley looked around, his face as white as ash. "Elijah Carter?" "Who?" she whispered. "Who are you?" Elijah did not reply. "You do not need to answer." The helicopter was answering for him. The community behind him, those who had been afraid, who had bowed their heads, now looked up to the sky. In their eyes, for the first time appeared a ray of light as thin as a thread, but enough to name hope. The distant sound of helicopters grew louder. It was not urgent like a movie chase scene. It had a finality, a rhythm, the sound of a force that came not to threaten, but to end. But in that moment, amid the broken space, the silence was so loud that Elijah could hear Jordan's heart pounding as he held his mother tightly. "Mom, what's going on?" Jordan's voice shook like a dry leaf. Marissa didn't know how to respond. She looked at Elijah with eyes that were both fearful and hopeful, like someone standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure if the ground was below or dry land. Elijah walked towards the mother and daughter, placing his hand on Marissa's shoulder. "It's going to be okay. I'm here." But even he could feel his hands getting cold. Not because he was afraid of the federal forces coming, but because he knew that if just one officer here lost his temper, things could get bloody. Hollister pointed at Elijah, his voice harsh, but clearly showing panic. "What unit is he calling? Why is a federal helicopter heading here?" Miller looked at the flashing red radio. "I've never seen that code before. It doesn't look like an FBI code. It doesn't look like an ATF code." Chase's voice trembled. "If it's the Special Surveillance Unit, then we're done for." Huxley suddenly shouted, like a person drowning in mud and starting to struggle. "No, that's not true. They're just here to support us. No one has the right to get ahead of me." But her voice was no longer sure. It was distorted, harsh, the sound of someone afraid of losing power. Huxley rushed to Elijah, grabbing his collar. "Carter, who are you? Why is the feds responding to your call?" Elijah did not flinch. His gaze was not one of defiance, but of someone who had carried a heavy burden for too long. "I warned you," he said slowly, enunciating each word. "You crossed the line." Huxley clenched his fists tighter, his voice cracking as if he were about to break. "You're an undercover agent, right? Right?" It was the first time she was really scared. A siren sounded from Hollister's car. "All teams alert. Federal Joint Task Force Response Unit is approaching. Back off from Subject Carter and surrounding civilians. Federal dispatch will take command within 90 seconds. Miller looked at Huxley, his face drained of color. "Boss," the commander said it clearly. "They'll be here in 90 seconds. Chase stammered. "Carter is a federally protected target?" "No way." Huxley took a step back, but then became more ferocious, the final ferocity of someone who has lost control. "Everyone back," she shouted to her comrades. "No one back. We cannot let them overwhelm us." But her words carried no weight. They were muffled, choked, like a scream from the bottom of a well. Hollister stepped back and whispered, "Lieutenant, we can't beat the Federation." Huxley turned to him, his eyes red. "Shut up. I won't let a nigger from this area get me fired." The words were hissed through gritted teeth, and the air exploded. Not by force, but with the naked truth. The community held its breath. Mr. Jerome was shocked. Lucille put her hand to her heart. Jordan looked at her father, then at the policewoman, as if she couldn't understand how adults could be so cruel. Elijah stood still. He had heard those words hundreds of times, but hearing them in front of his son hurt more than any blow. Marissa choked out, "How dare you say that in front of a child?" Huxley turned to her, his eyes sharp as a knife. "Because I have the right. Because I—" Before she could finish her sentence, a cold, steely shout came from behind. "Enough!" The whole police group turned back. It was Hollister. His voice was shaky, but full of awareness. "Lieutenant, we've gone too far. The federal unit is coming. If they hear what you just said, you're finished." Huxley was startled. For the first time, Elijah saw in her eyes not power, but fear of punishment. The helicopter was now right above the park. The wind from the rotor blades was so strong that the children's balloons were blown into the air and then burst. The paper decorations were blown wildly into the air. Jordan hugged his mother tightly, his eyes wide. A searchlight from the belly of the helicopter shone directly down on the picnic area. And then the loudspeaker came on, voice clear. "All Riverton PD units back away from civilians. This is an order from the Federal Joint Task Force." No one had ever heard that voice before. It was stern, not threatening, but enough to make anyone stand up straight because they knew. This was the voice of the system that truly had the power to punish. Huxley shouted back, making a last effort to keep his power. "This is the area I manage. You have no right." But the loudspeaker interrupted her. "Stop talking. Federal order has been activated by Agent Elijah Carter. Command transfers immediately." There was no sound. Only Huxley stood there, as if he had just been uprooted from the ground. "Agent? Agent C. Carter?" she stuttered. You're kidding me, right?" Elijah looked at her for the first time without anger or resentment in his eyes, but the eyes of a father, a husband, a man who had endured so much, and finally decided to stand up. "I don't want to use this card," Elijah said hoarsely. Today was supposed to be Jordan's birthday. He looked at his son. Jordan was shaking, but his eyes were gradually brightening when he saw his father. "But you chose to make it the day my community was trampled once again." Running footsteps echoed from the parking lot. From the shadows, agents in black jackets emblazoned with the letters DHS and JTF rushed into the area, forming a semicircle around the Riverton police. An agent, face serious, voice decisive. "All Riverton PD officers, drop your weapons. Force behavior control is active. All orders from Lieutenant Huxley are suspended." Miller immediately dropped his gun on the grass. Chase followed suit. Hollister raised his hands. Only Huxley stood motionless. Her face was contorted, as if she had been ripped from herself. "No. No way. You're an agent? How could a black guy like you?" A federal agent stepped forward and interrupted. "Lieutenant Donna Huxley, you are under arrest for abuse of power, discrimination, and civil intimidation." Huxley burst into tears not from remorse, but from loss of power. "No, I'm not going anywhere. I'm in charge here. Two agents restrained her, pulling her hands behind her back. The handcuffs clicked loudly in the park. Jordan looked at the scene, his eyes wide. He was not happy, not afraid. He just looked. Watching the person who had made the boy panic was dragged away like a criminal. Elijah walked over and hugged Jordan. The boy buried his face in his father's chest and asked, choking with emotion, "Daddy, is it because of me that this happened?" Elijah hugged his son tightly, no longer holding back, no longer hiding his emotions. "No, son, it's not your fault. It's the fault of those who forget that children deserve respect too." He placed his lips on his son's forehead. "And I have to stand up to protect you." Jordan hugged his dad tighter. The whole community stood behind Elijah. No one said a word, but in their eyes there was relief. There were tears. There was pain. There was hope. The wind blew through the trees again. It was no longer heavy. But it was real wind, the wind of the returning afternoon. The wind from the helicopter's blades gradually died down as the plane landed further away, leaving behind a quiet echo in Maple Crest Park, like the heartbeat of a place just emerging from a nightmare. But for Elijah, this was only the first step of the truth being revealed. The community still stood behind him. The fear had not yet left their eyes, but their eyes were no longer desperate. They looked at Elijah as if he held a door open, a door that would lead them out of years of oppression they had no way to fight back. Jordan held his father's hand tightly, his eyes still red but calmer. Marissa touched Elijah's shoulder lightly, as if to say she was there. She believed him, even though things were beyond what she could have imagined. Elijah bent down and asked his son, "Are you okay, Jordan?" The boy nodded, but his voice was still trembling. "I was scared, Daddy, but when I saw the helicopter, I knew good people were coming." Elijah held his son close to his chest. The small words caught in his throat. Good people are coming. Salvation sometimes comes in such simple ways. Federal agents quickly set up a perimeter around the area. No one yelled. No one threatened. They acted like people used to coming after chaos to clean up the mess. A man in a black jacket with the DHS logo stepped up to Elijah. He was in his 40s, tall, with a stern but warm gaze. "Elijah." He called the name as if calling an old teammate. Elijah nodded. "Chief Marshal." The man named Marshall squeezed Elijah's shoulder, not in greeting, but as a confirmation. "I stand with you." Marshall turned to the Riverton PD police force that was being restrained. "Lieutenant Donna Huxley," he said clearly, as if he were prefacing an indictment. "You are under investigation for abuse of power, racial discrimination, civil intimidation, violation of industry standards, and obstruction of federal duty." Huxley still tried to protest. "I did nothing wrong. I was just working." An agent interrupted in a calm but firm voice. "We have recordings. From park surveillance equipment, from resident cameras, and from Agent Carter's own activation call." Huxley paled. "What agent?" "He can't be. It can't be." Marshall looked at her, his eyes cold. "Do you think everyone has to wear a badge dangling from their chest to be an agent?" Then he turned to Elijah. "Thanks for keeping calm." Elijah simply replied, "I did it for my son. And for them." He pointed to the community standing in a tight group, but for the first time that afternoon, not out of fear. Because they are witnessing something they thought would never happen. Justice appearing right before their eyes. Marshall looked around the park, the blown-out tablecloths, the scattered balloons, the smashed cake. He let out a sigh. "We've been monitoring this area for 3 months," he said in a low voice. "We knew something was going on, but we've never had such strong evidence." Elijah pursed his lips. "They always choose the right time. Choose the right place without cameras. Choose the right person who dares not speak up. Until today," Marshall continued. No one said anything for a few seconds. A light wind blew, carrying with it dust and pieces of red paper from the torn banner. Elijah looked at Jordan. The boy looked at the ruined cake, his eyes sad. Marshall saw it. He walked closer to Jordan, crouching down at eye level. "Jordan, is it your birthday today?" The boy nodded slightly. Marshall smiled, gently. Gentle, like a familiar uncle in the neighborhood. "I'm sorry you had to go through this. But I promise you, those who do wrong will pay." Jordan mumbled, "I just want my party to be normal. That's all." Marissa turned away to wipe away her tears. Elijah put his hand on her shoulder, as if to give her strength with the warmth of his palm. On the other side, Miller and Chase sat handcuffed on the grass. Hollister stood still, head bowed, not daring to look at anyone. An agent reads, "Officers, you will be taken to the center for questioning immediately. Your records and body cams will be seized." Chase stammered. I was just following orders." Marshall turned around, his voice cold. "There is no such thing as just following orders when those orders are wrong." Huxley screamed as he was carried away. "You have no right. I will sue. I will." An agent pulled her into the car. "That's what everyone says when they're arrested, Lieutenant." The car door slammed shut. It was a small sound, but it echoed through the Maple Crest community like a bell tolling the end of a long period of fear. Elijah stood still watching the scene unfold. Not happy, not satisfied. There was only a deep weariness in his eyes, the weariness of someone who had carried a secret for too long. Marshall walked up to him. "You know," he said softly, "even though we arrived in time today, the price you paid for 11 months of undercover, no one but you knows." Elijah sighed. "The hardest part isn't pretending to be normal. The hardest part is pretending not to see the injustice that happens every day." Marshall put his hand on his shoulder. "You ended it." Elijah looked at Jordan, the boy whose face was being wiped by Mrs. Lucille with a tissue. "Not yet," Elijah said. "Today is just the beginning." The sky cleared. The gray clouds drifted away like a belated goodbye. A young agent from the federal team approached and said softly, "Agent Carter, the car is about to take you and your family to the center to file a report. Would you like to rest for a few minutes?" Elijah shook his head. "No, I want to stay until everyone is safe." He looked out at the community. They hadn't left. They were standing together, as proof that they weren't alone. An old man said loudly, "Elijah, thank you. You saved this neighborhood today." Elijah shook his head. "Not me. Everyone has suffered enough." Lucille stepped forward, leaning on her cane. "But you were the first to stand up, Elijah." Elijah choked. Of all the words he had ever heard, that one shook him the most. Jordan pulled Elijah's hand. "Daddy, will they come back later?" Elijah bent down, looking into his son's eyes, the eyes he had promised to protect for life. "No," he said softly, but firmly as steel. "No one has the right to hurt my family again." Jordan leaned her head against his chest, breathing a sigh of relief. Elijah closed his eyes for a second. Just a second, long enough to feel the weight on his shoulders melt away, replaced by a peace he had long forgotten. An agent waved. "Agent Carter, we have to take you now." Elijah took one last look around. Maple Crest Park, devastated but standing. The community, outraged but standing. His family, shaken but safe in his arms. He took Marissa's hand and led Jordan along. Before getting into the federal vehicle, Elijah turned back to look at the pile of tattered balloons lying on the grass. "Is that your birthday?" Jordan asked softly. Elijah smiled and patted his son's head. "No, son, your birthday just starts over here." And they got in the car, leaving behind an old park, but bringing with them a new hope. The next morning, Riverton was not the same Riverton. The small town, which was as quiet as an old American coat, was now filled with the sound of cameras, reporters, and the whispers of residents pouring into the streets, not out of curiosity, but because what they had been waiting for many years had finally happened. The system is broken, and people feel it. In the makeshift federal office, Elijah sat before a tape recorder, his hands clasped together. He wore no uniform, no badge, just a plain gray t-shirt. But his presence silenced the room. Chief Marshal sat across from him, opening a file as thick as a school yearbook. He slid it toward Elijah. "We got this," Marshall said. "Riverton PD. It's not just abuse. It's systemic." Elijah opened the files. Hundreds of pages. Photos. Minutes. File numbers. Names of black residents in the area. People detained without a warrant. Searches without a warrant. Property seized and never returned. Elijah frowned. How long have they been doing this?" Marshall sighed. "At least 7 years. Maybe longer." An agent standing nearby added, "We found evidence that Huxley and several other officers falsified reports to gain increased budgets and control over the Maple Crest area." Elijah closed his eyes. A chill ran down his spine. Not because of surprise, but because of this truth. He had a hunch for a long time. Marshall lowered his voice, as if talking to an old friend. "Elijah, you know that when we sent you in undercover, we knew there was a problem, but we didn't know it was this deep." Elijah looked at the file before him. Each piece of paper a piece of the pain of the community he had lived with for years. "I saw their fear every day," Elijah said. "I saw old people not daring to go out after 6 p.m. I saw children bowing their heads when police cars drove by. I saw mothers double-locking their doors just to get a few hours of sleep." He paused. A choke entered his voice. I was so used to fear that I thought it was normal. Marshall nodded silently. That's why we need you. Because you don't just see, you feel. A young agent entered and placed a small device on the table. Agent Carter, this is all the data collected from the hidden sensors in the park. This recorded the entire conversation of Riverton PD yesterday. Marshall looked at Elijah. Do you want to hear? Elijah hesitated. On one hand, he wanted to see the whole truth. But on the other hand, he knew that hearing those insults again would cut his heart like a knife. I hear, Elijah said softly but firmly. The agent turned on the device. The sound of wind, the sound of children. Then, Huxley's voice rang out. I won't let a black guy from this area get me fired. Her voice cut through the air like a knife cutting into the heart of the community, like a pain that could no longer be hidden. Marissa stood beside him, shivering slightly. She had heard that before, but hearing it again, it was still like a slap to the soul. Jordan sat next to his mother, not understanding everything, but enough to know the words were cruel. Elijah didn't shed a tear, didn't scream, didn't react violently. He just sat motionless, like someone who has seen too much reality to be surprised. But the pain is still there. Marshall turned off the device. He said softly, Elijah, you don't have to be strong all the time. Elijah looked at him for a long time and then said, but I have to be strong for them. That whole community lived in fear for decades. I was the only one they thought was brave enough to say this. He inhaled, slowly, heavy, and I can't let them down. Marshall nodded, his eyes filled with respect. You won't have to do it alone anymore. The 3 p.m. press conference that afternoon became the focus of the entire state of North Carolina. Dozens of cameras were trained on the podium. Maple Crest residents crowded in the distance, carrying both hope and fear. Marshall stepped forward. When he opened his mouth, his voice was as steady as the sound of a hammer hitting a wooden courtroom table. Today, the federal government officially announced an investigation into the Riverton Police Department. The whole hall was bustling. We have collected undeniable evidence of systematic abuses of power, discrimination, unlawful enforcement, and illegal asset seizures that have been going on for years. Marshall turned the file page. 19 officers were suspended. 7 were arrested at the scene. 3 local judges are under investigation. And the entire Riverton PD has been placed under special federal supervision for a minimum of 5 years. The residents behind them erupted, not with cheers, but with tears of those finally being heard. Marshall continued. The actions of the officers in the incident at Maple Crest Park were the last straw. He leaned back, giving way. Elijah stood. The whole hall was silent. No camera noise. No whispers. A reverent silence, as if before them was not an agent, but a man standing up for what was right. Elijah looked around the hall, then said, that day was supposed to be my son's birthday. A small party, a simple cake, a simple joy. He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. But they turned it into a place where they abused their power. Not just against me, but against this entire community. Against people who deserve the same respect as any citizen. Elijah held the microphone, his voice low but firm. I don't want to get anyone into trouble. I don't want to be the center of attention. I don't want to be a hero. He turned his eyes to Jordan and Marissa sitting in the front row. I just want a decent birthday for my child. And I want every child in our community to grow up without fear of the people who are supposed to protect them. The whole hall applauded, softly at first, then loudly. Not cheers. Respect. As the press conference ended, an elderly white woman walked up and took Elijah's hand. My son, she said, her voice trembling. Maybe people will call you a hero. But to me, you are just a good father. Elijah smiled a tired, but genuine smile. And that's what I want to be the most, he replied. Riverton in the fall has a special light. It's not bright nor sad, just a pale yellow, enough to remind people that summer is over and winter has not yet arrived. After the incident at Maple Crest Park, the town did not return to its old rhythm immediately. But little by little, people began to learn to breathe again. That morning, Elijah drove through Maple Crest. The first thing he noticed was the quiet, not the tense kind of quiet like before, but a real calm, like the stillness of a lake after a storm. On Jerome's patio, two children were playing with an old basketball. On Lucille's porch, an American flag fluttered in the wind, a new one she had changed to when she received word that North Carolina's Internal Affairs Division had officially taken over Riverton PD. Under the shade of a tree in front of a small grocery store, three young men were laughing and talking instead of giving each other worried looks. Elijah stopped the car, opened the door, and got out. No one avoided his eyes anymore. No one warned him that he was a government man anymore. A young man raised his hand in greeting. "Hey, Agent Carter, not wearing a suit today?" Elijah laughed and replied, "Today, I'm just Elijah." The group laughed. Every time he heard the phrase Agent Carter, he felt strange. Perhaps because for months, that title had been his hidden self, and Elijah, the neighbor, the roofer, the man who stood guard at the school gate after 3 p.m., was his true self. Now, the world knows both. And, for the first time, he doesn't feel like a burden. In the afternoon, Marissa called him home early. "I'll go home for a bit. Jordan has something he wants to show Dad." Her voice sounded eager, the soft kind of eagerness Elijah hadn't heard in a long time. When Elijah opened the door and entered the house, the sound of pots and pans and the smell of stew filled the kitchen. Jordan stood in the middle of the living room, his hands behind his back. "Guess what?" said the boy. Elijah crossed his arms, pretending to be serious. "Is it a 100 on the math test?" Jordan shook his head and laughed. "No, your guess is bad." The boy showed what he was hiding, a piece of paper drawn with crayons. Children's painting, but Elijah froze. In the drawing is Jordan, standing next to Elijah, the two holding hands in front of Maple Crest Park. In the sky is a small helicopter with the word FBI written in cute, curly letters. Below, Jordan neatly wrote, "You saved me that day, Dad. But I think you saved Riverton." Elijah choked. In that moment, it was clear to him, the fear of a ruined birthday had not won over his son's heart. Marissa stood leaning against the door, smiling. "You said you wanted me to hang it in my office, so I'll remember why I do what I do." Elijah knelt down and pulled Jordan into his arms. It had been so long since he felt such peace that his heart softened. 2 days later, Riverton held the largest community meeting in town history. Not an emergency, not a complaint, not a protest. Just a meeting between residents and the federal oversight team. And the person invited to speak was Elijah. He stood on a small, makeshift stage in the community center. More than 300 people had gathered in front of him, young and old, and families who had been hiding from the police for years. Elijah started slowly, as was his habit. "I thought I understood the fear of this community. But it wasn't until they ruined my son's birthday that I understood how deep it goes to the gut." Everyone was silent. "I don't want Riverton to go back to the way it was. I want Riverton to be a place where future generations don't remember this as a wound, but as a starting point." He looked up and looked at each person. "People ask me what it's like to call in the federal team." He stopped, then said softly, "It was like someone finally opened the window after the room had been locked for so long." An old man in the front row burst into tears. A young man wiped his eyes. The children didn't understand the full meaning of the words, but saw their parents nodding. Elijah continued, "I can't promise that everything will be perfect right away, but I promise we won't suffer alone anymore." The whole hall applauded, slowly, then louder. Not cheers, but cheers of agreement. The voices of the last people were heard after years of silence. In the weeks that followed, Maple Crest Park changed dramatically. One Saturday morning, Elijah took Jordan to the park. New ribbons are tied around the lampposts. A volunteer group is repainting the BBQ area. A new sign has been put up, "Community Area," where every family is welcome. Jordan asked curiously, "Dad, why does this park need so much repair?" Elijah sat down next to his son. "Because what happened here left scars." Jordan looked around the park. His eyes were more serious than usual. "But now it's beautiful again." Elijah put his hand on his son's shoulder. "Yes, just like our community. It gets hurt, but it heals." Jordan smiled. a smile that reminded Elijah that children sometimes understood more than adults thought. That evening, as Elijah stood on the porch looking at the dim yellow streetlights, Marshall called. "Elijah, you know you can come back to D.C. anytime," Marshall said. "We can arrange a special location if you want." Elijah looked at the peaceful street in front of him, then at the door behind him, where Marissa was reading and Jordan was coloring. He knew the answer more clearly than ever. "I want to stay here," Elijah replied. "Riverton needs me, not as an agent, but as a neighbor, as a father, as a man of the community." Marshall smiled lightly. "I think I expected that answer." Elijah asked, "Are you trying to keep me in D.C.?" Marshall laughed heartily. "No, I just want to hear you say it yourself." The two were silent for a few seconds as two men shared respect without embellishment. "Elijah," Marshall said, "I am proud of you." Elijah smiled, looking at the space before him. "I just did the right thing." Marshall replied, "The right thing isn't always the easy thing to do." The call ended, but the words echoed in Elijah's head for a long time. 1 month later, Jordan's 9th birthday arrives. Marissa asked, "Do you want to have the party at home, or go to the pizza place in town?" "Whatever." Jordan smiled slyly. "No, I want to work at Maple Crest Park." Elijah and Marissa looked at each other and said nothing for a moment. Jordan continued, "I want to use the same place as last year, but this time, everyone's happy." Elijah felt his eyes sting slightly, a rare occurrence for an agent who had been through so much. Marissa smiled gently. "Okay, I'll set the table, and this year I'll make your favorite cake." The birthday took place on a breezy afternoon. The crowd was larger than expected, not just blacks but also whites, Latinos, and Asians who lived nearby. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew they wanted to contribute to rewriting the memories of the boy who cried in the park a year ago. A young policewoman, Officer Martinez, a new recruit to the reorganized force, brought a large gift box. "Jordan, this is from all the new officers in the team," she said. Jordan opened the gift to find a basketball jersey signed by the entire new police squad. Jordan shouted, "Wow, thank you." Officer Martinez smiled gently. "We want you to know, good cops still exist." Jordan spoke softly, but enough to make Elijah turn around. "I know. I can see it." While everyone was eating, Elijah stood in a corner watching. He saw Lucille holding Jordan, Jerome carrying a tray of barbecue, children running around the big oak tree. On the lawn where the cake had been smashed was now a colorful banquet table. Mrs. Lucille walked up to him. "This park looks different, doesn't it, Elijah?" He nodded. "Because today, no one is afraid of anyone anymore." She smiled and put her hand on his shoulder. "Every wound will heal, but whether it heals beautifully or not depends on those who help heal it." Elijah Quay sang, "You say it like you're complimenting me." The old lady laughed. "No, I'm praising this whole community." As the sun set, Jordan blew out the candles. The whole park applauded. And in that moment, Elijah realized. He had been dreading this moment all year, but the scariest thing had not happened. No sirens, no shouting, no abuse of power. There was only the sound of children's laughter, the sound of families celebrating, the sound of a community coming back to life after the pain. Elijah watched Jordan embrace his second birthday cake without fear, and he knew this was true justice. Not the handcuffs, not the 20-year sentence, not the noisy press conference. It is the ability of people to feel safe in the places where they live. That is the biggest victory. On the way home, Jordan leaned his head on Elijah's shoulder and asked, "Dad, will this ever happen again?" Elijah placed his hand on his son's head. "I dare not promise what I am not sure of. But I promise one thing." Jordan looked up. Elijah said, "That if one day someone does something wrong again, there will always be someone who stands up and says, 'No, enough.'" Jordan smiled and closed his eyes to sleep. And Elijah drives through Riverton, a town still scarred, but finally, with a future. The story is about more than just a ruined birthday party. It touches on something deeper, the fragility of human life in the face of power, and the extraordinary strength of faith when a father decides to stand up for what is right. Elijah Carter wasn't perfect. He was scared, he hesitated, he struggled. But like so many real-life fathers and mothers, he chose protection, chose kindness, chose justice, even if the price was his own safety. From this story, we learn that justice doesn't come by itself. It takes men and women to stand up, even if their hands shake. Kindness is not loud, but it can change a community if we pursue it consistently. The truth is powerful, even if it takes a long time to speak. And most importantly, one person can also light up hope for many others if they don't give up. For older audiences, those who have experienced many changes in life, this story reminds us that it is never too late to do the right thing, and it is never too late to believe that the world still has hope. Thank you for taking the time to follow this emotional story. If you believe that stories of courage, justice, and humanity should be spread, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us have more motivation to bring stories that touch hearts and awaken faith in good things.